when I look at that picture, dude, you're talking about making money through this stuff. All I see is money, right? Because like there's so much money to be made in making this stuff in a fair way.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Read Between the Lines. This is your weekly podcast that covers both fiction and nonfiction books on a rotating basis. If you haven't caught any of our content, go ahead and check out our YouTube channel. We release a fiction book on the weeks that we cover nonfiction and a nonfiction book on the weeks that we cover fiction. Now, this week, we're going to take you behind the book and between the lines of How to Avoid a Climate Disaster by Bill Gates. This covers the policies that are in place and the changes that need to be made in order for us to confront the upcoming climate emergency. Now, I am nowhere near qualified enough, though I do feel much more educated on the subject after reading this book. So I've brought, as always, my good friend Sidney to come talk with me. Sidney, can you come in and say hello?
How's it going, man? How's it going? Pretty exciting book we read this week, I gotta say. It's hard to put down. Definitely hard to put down.
Bill Gates turned out he's not a one-trick pony. The man came out, wrote a book, and not only is it informative, but I actually enjoyed reading it, which I feel like is difficult for a book like this.
Absolutely. Like it's a real treat in this kind of literature because a lot of this stuff is doom and gloomy, and it's also not written to be turnable, I guess, if that's good phrasing.
Consumable
So this is a really,
might be a good word.
yeah,
But
this is a very consumable book, which I feel like hits pretty well with the thrust of what he wanted this book to do, right? If he had written this book with too much jargon thrown in there, it would have been counterintuitive to the purpose of what he was doing it for, I think.
Well, and I think it comes from him not being a climate person. You know what I mean? Like his background is in tech, and so where he comes from is just looking into it as an investor. So he's been the one out there trying to figure out what he wants to invest in, trying to do good work and bring the innovation that we need. He talks a lot about that. He always not always, but a lot of times he comes back to that idea of consistently, okay, boom, we need investors, we need money to make these innovations. And I'm you know me, I love investing. So I'm about to geek out about all the talk he has in this book about investing and how important it is and all of that. So real quick before we really dive into it, is there one note that you have with your Kindle that maybe you wanna call out? I know I have something. So if you can pull something out really quick for us, I'm gonna go ahead and talk about my favorite quote from this whole book. He talks about, or at least this is a statistic. It was something that stuck out in my mind. Bill Gates says that there are 51 billion CO2 carbon emissions or CO2 equivalents per year, and the amount we need to get to is 0. A lot of countries are focusing on reducing
51 billion tons.
51 billion tons. Thank you. And a lot of countries are focusing on reducing that number, but eliminating it is the only way for us to truly avoid a climate disaster. So that really stuck out to me, and that was the kind of whole premise of this book. And I want to get it out there right at the beginning because it kind of sets the scale of like, okay, this is what we need to reach. And he mentions it of when you listen to people give numbers of what they're doing to help the environment, take it back to this billion number. You know what I mean? This 51 billion tons of carbon emissions that we're dealing with. That's what we have to deal with. So, Squid, do you have a statistic, a quote, or anything that you want to just highlight real quick at the beginning before we start?
Yeah. So, kind of on the back end of that 51 billion tons thing, in that same intro to the book, he talks about what it'll take to get it down to 0. And then he talks about, so this book was published in February 2021, so it's a very recent book that includes what the coronavirus has done to the economy and everything. And the coronavirus resulted in a 5% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from the previous year over end. So, and he says, consider what it took to achieve the 5% reduction, right? So however many people died tragically, right? The economy was set back, I think, like 5 years or something of like just like gross domestic value, and that kind of stuff.
Numbers, but I'm pretty sure you're pretty spot on. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, at
Uh,
least. So, yeah.
and right, so that's 5% reduction. 5.
5% reduction in
You
our
need
carbon emissions.
you need the other 95, right? And I think, and the reason I say that is not to be doom and gloomy, like this is so look how difficult this was. I mean, it does a really good job of framing the magnitude of change that we're talking about here, right? We aren't talking about something where you change your Instagram profile picture for 3 weeks and then like post that online for a little bit and then you're done, right? This is a society like altering change we need to do with how we arrange industry and consumer behavior.
And he makes no bones about it. He makes no bones about the fact that this is going to be hard. The second chapter is titled "This Will Be Hard." There's no doubt about it because
I love that. I love the second chapter's title. Perfect.
Yeah, because he's not trying to like BS us. He knows that it's going to be hard, but he also highlights that carbon and carbon emissions are directly related to economies. So the larger scale your economy is, the larger your emissions are. So take that into like think about that. The richest countries are the countries that are screwing up the environment the most. Like the people who are pumping out the most into the air, doing the most damage. Those are the people that are benefiting the most from these carbon emissions. And then think about the fact that the poor people, the people that are in these economies that are already struggling and don't even have access to the current technology that we've already innovated and don't have as much of an opportunity to innovate because they're not from a position of power, those communities, those countries, those economies, those are the ones that are going to be hit like a hammer. A hammer is going to come down on those economies because as all of these things, as the greenhouse gases start to fill the atmosphere and raise the temperature, even slightly, even 1 to 2 degrees, you're going to see water levels rising and weather patterns increasing, and the communities that are based on and depend on the consistency of weather and the consistency of these things, they're going to be the ones hardest hit. And I just want to take a second to reemphasize that the struggling communities, the ones that need our help the most and need the most, are the ones that are going to be hardest hit as a result of the irresponsible behavior of economies that have already taken advantage of carbon emission progress. There's a direct link between carbon emissions and higher economies. Do you remember that chapter and what you talked about, Squid?
Oh, there's a great graph. There's a fantastic graph. It's like carbon emissions and GDP. It's like a 1-to-1 relationship. Oh, here it is. There's income and energy use go hand in hand. Is it income per person? Which is wait, you might be able to see it. You might be able to see it. Yeah. There's some pretty clearly significant correlation between on the x-axis there is to be clear, this graph is energy consumption.
How are we getting our energy?
But the vast majority of the energy we generate is from carbon generating procedures.
And I want to talk and go ahead and let's talk about that. How we are so focused on fossil fuels and reforming fossil fuels and all those like really important things, but that's only, what is it? I believe it is 17%, of energy use and of carbon emissions is directly linked to fuel. The biggest one, and I didn't think about this. I didn't think about the manufacturing process. You know what I mean? So it's not about how often you drive your car. That's a problem. That needs to be fixed. We need to switch over to electric vehicles. But think about how much carbon and how much environmental damage we're doing with creating the car, the steel that goes in it, the plastics, the silica, like everything that we do to create the car that gets on the road, to create your phone and your computer and the light, like not even running the light itself. That process takes energy, and we need to figure out a way to do that as well. But the manufacturing process is doing irreparable damage that we're not taking responsibility for. And that I really want to talk about
breakdown
that is the how he talks about companies needing to take responsibility. I do want to come back to that. So
the overall breakdown, Drake, making things like you're talking about, 31% of greenhouse gas emissions, plugging in, making power, 27% of greenhouse gas emissions, growing things, that's food, plants, that kind of stuff, is 19% of greenhouse gas emissions. Getting around transportation is 16%, and keeping warm and cool is 7%.
God, that's wild. That manufacturing's right there at the top, and it's not being talked about. It's not in the news. It's not like people focus on the second one, the plugging in, that 27%. And 27% is a large number. I was wrong. It wasn't 17. It was 27. That how making these lights, making your computers run, all of that. So figuring out a way to make that more efficient and making those changes is important. But over 30% is just the manufacturing, and that comes down to what? Let's talk about green premiums. You ready, Squid?
Yeah, man.
So green premiums are this term. I think he coined it. I'm not 100%.
No, he did not.
So he stole it. He stole this term. He borrowed this term. He didn't make this term up. Somebody give me a better word. He's borrowing this term. There's got to be a word for that.
He's using it.
He's using it. I'm an idiot. I can't believe. He's using the term.
It's a 3-letter word, bud.
Oh man, what is it? Using a $100 word when a nickel one would have done.
Yep.
Okay, so he's using this word called green premiums, and it's the idea that in order to go green, it is going to be more expensive. Biofuel is more expensive than regular fuel. Solar panel energy is more expensive than fossil fuel energy. And currently, we do not have an economic way to overcome that green premium. We are not charging for that green premium. So think about it this way. If I started to think about it in the sense of we are only charging exactly how much it costs to make a profit on creating the energy, rather than also up to the point of the consumer getting it. We are not then considering what are the effects and the damage that should be a part of that charge after the consumer uses the energy, aka the impact it has on the environment. There currently isn't a system set up. We've started to see incentives. We've started to see the government get involved with regulation. And Bill Gates hounded that over and over and over and over again, that green premiums are this visualization, this way that we can see the difference between how we create energy now and the cost that is going to be incurred by then creating the energy in the way.
If I could modify that a little bit, Drake.
Yes.
So the green premium is by itself the additional cost you incur from applying a new technology that does not emit greenhouse gases, if that makes sense. Separate from the green premium is the cost of making something and emitting greenhouse gases while you do it, right? So like you're saying, currently, if you buy a lighter or a car or whatever that as they made it, they produce a lot of greenhouse gases doing it. The only people that have to pay for that greenhouse gas emissions is society at large because of the negative consequences of the emission. So, and that's kind of associated with green premiums, but not really. And so ideally, you would be able to take that cost and pass it on to the consumer, and everyone would be happy paying it, if that makes sense. So if a car produced, if you could do the math, which is impossible because it's almost impossible to break it out exactly, to find out that making this car produced enough greenhouse gases to do $3,000 of damage, right, over like the course of like the downsides of the emissions, then you increase the cost of the car by $3,000, and then theoretically you'd be done. paying.
The most straightforward way to do that would be how much does making that car, how much carbon does that making that car emit? Then how much does it take to directly pull that carbon out of the atmosphere? Because there are methods to do that, and like make that charge, but it's astronomical because the technology isn't strong. It hasn't been developed yet. So
$200 a ton.
And when you think about the fact that we're pumping out 51 billion tons, anybody want to do that math really quick? Anybody in the chat want to take on that math? Because you did it in the book, but I welcome you. I welcome you to do the math really quick. $200 a ton, 51 billion tons. Go ahead. See what country is ever gonna spot that. But that would be a way. That's kind of a good visualization of the solution to a green premium. If a company says, I'm going to continue making these vehicles, I'm going to continue making this energy in a way that I know is harmful to the environment and it emits these gases, the government can say, okay, cool, fine, you do you. We're not gonna take that away from you. You run your business however you want to, but you are damaging and you are causing something that we have to then do. So we are now going to charge you an extra premium to do it that way. And that is going to incentivize coming up with different. And I love the idea that Bill Gates puts forward about incentives are key. Incentives are the most important part. Making people want to innovate, want to change. Because we're not going to without it. Remember when gas prices shot up to $4 a gallon?
Everyone's buying small cars.
Everyone's buying small cars. And that's the last time I remember. That was the first time I remember electric vehicles really taking off.
Just going back to that $200 per ton, right, number. And the average person in America produces 18 tons of carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas equivalent carbon dioxide, every year. Right, in the United States. So 18 times 200. Where's that number? Let's see.
That's gonna be 1,800 times 2, so it's going to be 3,600.
Yep, so that's the cost that each person would have to pay out of their pocket to get rid of the every year. Yeah, that should go to zero.
Yeah, that should go to zero, but that's not just on a consumer level. That doesn't even take into consideration. That doesn't even take into consideration the rest of it, like all the manufacturing and that's what I'm understanding, right? Like it's only the consumer. It's only how much we make in our homes and like plugging in. That doesn't take into consideration what each consumer then causes to be manufactured, does it?
I honestly could not tell you. That is from a graph. So
a good bit about nuclear energy, and that it's a good way moving forward. Like that, he mentions that a ton of times, but it's dangerous to say kind of what you're saying, Carson, that it's the only possible way forward. It's not. You have to diversify. Solar, wind, hydro. These are all really important because, I mean, nuclear is the only way to consistently produce energy all year round, 24/7. But it's not economically possible. People it's not going to happen. And two, it's putting all of your eggs in one basket, and not only is no one going to be willing to do that, it's not a good idea. Squid, what do you think about that? We're super reliant on fossil fuels. We didn't realize that it was a problem when we first started out, and then now we're hooked on them because it's the best way to do it. You're just gonna throw one out and then pull in nuclear. I think the way that we're going about it now is actually diversifying is way more viable in the future because you have more options than just fossil fuels. You have more options than nuclear. There are more ways than nuclear to get out of this, and that's something that this book really focused on. Was there isn't just one solution; it's a combination of everything. Do you remember any of the stuff he talks about nuclear versus some of the other ways of creating?
Yeah. My thing about just exclusive language, I think, is counterintuitive to the point of the effort, if that makes sense. I agree that nuclear, especially next generation nuclear, which he talks about in this book, which is super exciting, uh, drastically increase efficiency and drastically reduce waste generation, that kind of stuff, um, which is fantastic. Um, he he even mentions like so some of the newer nuclear facilities they're designing will be able to run off of the waste product from the older nuclear facilities, which is just sick, like absolutely ridiculous. Um, but the problem with nuclear is that it takes um, 15 years to build a nuclear power plant, and 15 years is assuming that the power plant you're building is already proven technology that requires no further proving to get licensed to operate.
Bill Gates talks about how investors are. So let's start talking about the ways he mentioned that we could get there. Specifically, how governments are going to have to incentivize things to bring in private money and private investors. Because I thought this was a great point. I thought this was a very realist idea of like how we could actually get this done. Because if a government just starts coming out and is like, we're going to tax everything and this is the way you have to do it, it's not going to work. Getting private investors, private money, doing it economically, choosing to go about it in an economic pathway, that's the only way that this is going to happen. Make the money talk and we fix climate. Getting on a pedestal and screaming is not going to do it. Getting on a pedestal and saying it's going to make you money, that's the key.
And a really important distinction he makes in this book that I love hearing, but is harsh, but is important, I think, is that there is a distinction between stopping the climate change like problem and environmentalist policies at large. If that makes sense. Um, so like he goes into a whole thing about why trees aren't the answer for climate change, but trees are the answer for a lot of other environmentally sensitive issues, right? But trees will not sink enough carbon to help us at all in this problem. It's just not how trees work. I think he said you'd have to cover 70% of the world's landmass in trees.
He compares planting trees to bailing out a sinking ship with buckets.
According to the math, it's not even buckets; it's a thimble.
Oh, even worse. So like a tiny bucket with holes in it. That's
exactly.
Yeah. When you think of 51 billion tons, billion tons. Sorry, that was really loud. That was really loud. Okay, so let's talk about economics. I know maybe I'm a weirdo, but this might have been my favorite part of the book. Is every time he talked about investing, because it made so much sense to me. People, like, unless you get the money to talk, it's not going to happen. I'm sorry, that's just not the way the world works. And if you spend too much time, if you spend too much time fighting and thinking that this is how the world should work, and not just going ahead and understanding this needs money and we need to make the money follow it, and people will follow more money, you're not going to make a difference. And he makes a great point about it of like, these are risky investments, and we need to both make it less risky for investors and start making investors understand more that these things can pop off. It's not charity. I love that line. He said, this innovation towards carbon emission technology and innovation, it's not charity, it's investment. The first country that can create green, clean energy is going to become a world leader immediately. And why not try and make the United States that leader? Why not?
China has literally made it one of its top national security issues.
If I remember right, their budget reflects that, and that's another thing. When we're talking about money, he wants the budget for this innovation and these technology to go from, what is it, I think 5% to 17%, because it's so small, so low.
So the current number right now is 3% on R&D, government spending on R&D for this kind of topic. Or no, that was investor spending. That wasn't government spending. It's 3% of profits and that kind of stuff. And typical industry and not typical industry, but for like the tech and tech industry, it's like 13% invested back in R&D, which is,
And look at how much they expand and how much they like grow. He did make the point that it's a little bit non-equatable because tech has a unique ability to scale where nuclear energy and power and solar and wind, that they take longer, and people kind of, and that's what annoys investors, and that's what scares away money, is that energy is a long-term investment, a long-term goal with high risk. And anyone who's an investor in the audience knows that that's our words that investors hate to hear. Long-term, high risk. Nobody wants that. No investor wants to touch something that they're not going to get their money back soon, and they're not going to see and they're not going to see a guaranteed yield from it. That is anathema to any investor. So you have to bring in government money. You have to. They've got to take the first step, and then the private money follows it. And I'm excited. Like, that's something that I feel like I'm not doing enough to talk about. Is this book did a really good job of making me feel like it's possible, making me feel like if we did these things, it really could work. And you talked about how it wasn't a doom and gloom. So can you kind of mention what about this book made you feel like, yes, this is hard, but just like something like weightlifting or running a marathon, just because it's hard, you don't necessarily quit on it.
You use great examples. Like in the 1970s, all the cities all over the world were getting covered in smog, and then everyone was like, "All right, we have to fix this. We're gonna change some government policy around," and then they fixed the issue. Like, smog is no longer an issue in a lot of major cities, because of federal regulation. The Clean Air Act specifically. I've had to design power plants, pain in the ass stuff, because of the Clean Air Act, because of that regulation, which is really cool. Really cool to think about.
I talked about bringing you on because I'm not qualified. I meant to say something, and then I just got caught up in just how awesome of a friend you are and how much I love you. That you're an engineer. What you do is, like, some of what you do is designing plants and manufacturing things. And I'm guessing these regulations have, just like you said, had a huge impact on how you design and how you think.
You're quite literally, yeah.
And your bosses wouldn't have done that. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but you wouldn't have been required to do that, and your bosses wouldn't have pushed you to learn how to do that without those regulations and without those expectations.
No, absolutely not, because we're building power plants to make money for the people investing in them. And if you have to put in $6 million of emissions control equipment at the end of a boiler to treat the flue gas coming out of it, you better have a reason to spend $6 million. Like,
get that. Like investors are just trying to make more money. They're trying to protect
a very fun argument that I like to hear people make. I'm slowly becoming more comfortable. How's that? Is that better? An argument that I love hearing from people is they're like, we can let the market adjust to this, right? Which I love to hear, because honestly, at my core, I agree with that. Except for the part where I work in this industry and it's part of my job to deal with this stuff. And I can tell you right now that if someone's making a power plant, they don't give a shit about anything except if they're putting this money in, how much money they're getting out of it. That's the only thing they care about, and if it's going to run reliably. And that's it.
If you go to a developer and they're building a subdivision, unless they can charge a higher price for a greenhouse, for green emissions, unless there's some reason for them to use non-carbon cement, for you to use better, they're gonna hire the cheapest builder they can. If that cheap builder is using materials that are killing the environment, but they don't have to pay for the environment, then nope, you're gonna build a house that is the cheapest one as a developer, and you just scale that up to exactly what Squid's talking about.
That power plant thing I was talking about earlier, with the emissions control equipment, we were working on a plant that was going to cost $120 million. That's the total price tag of the place, $120 million. And we had to decide between emissions control technology that costs $2 million or $8 million. And the decision process we did to do that. This is in the EU, is pull up the EU standards on what is allowable based on the power we're producing and what we're using to produce the power, and then if we can hit those limits with the $2 million one, we'll use the $2 million one. If we can't, we use the $8 million one. And the $8 million one, of course, did a much better job protecting the environment. Which comes really well into, I think, one of his most important points here. If I can find it real quick. To work on technology, policy, and markets at the same time. Oh, well, I can put it down instead. How's that? Is that better? To work on technology, policy, and markets at the same time. Because there's this really, I think it's really fascinating how there's this nexus of policy, like what's available, right? The best available technology for producing power. We'll stick with power for all these examples because it's the easiest thing to talk about. I think everyone understands you burn something, you produce some heat, turn it to steam, like turn it to electricity, you turn on your light at your house and it turns on. So there's a best available technology to produce that power that produces less greenhouse gases. And then there is the markets that dictate how much money people will spend on their power, which dictates how much money people will spend to create power, right? And then both of those are predicated upon the policy enacted by by regulation, which of course feeds back into the market, and they're all very interconnected. Which I love that. I think it's really important when you're discussing these problems to remember that these are not one-dimensional issues, that are single things, which is why I think it's important to avoid exclusive language when you're talking about and a lot, like I'm pretty plugged into this sphere and like social media and LinkedIn and that kind of stuff. And a lot of what people will say, they'll be like, my company's invented this technology. This is the way to stop climate change. And I think that's kind of defeatist language to begin with. Because one, it implies without some specific technology, we're not going to solve the issue. And number two, that people, hey man, you're done. Don't do any more research on your shit, on your stuff. Don't worry about it. I solved it. And then I don't like that. Because this is a problem that is not one-dimensional. So it's a logical fallacy, I think, that the solution can be one-dimensional, right?
Because it's also not just that government regulation you were talking about. It's also getting to the point where that $8 million piece of equipment actually only costs $2 million. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because the reason the $2 million piece of equipment costs so much less is because we've been making it for 20 years instead of 5, right? And so we're better at making it. We make it more efficiently. It's not a fundamentally more complicated piece of equipment or fundamentally bigger. We're just better at making it because it's been around for longer and been used for longer.
I'm guessing some of those R&D costs have been recouped. So in order to make profit on it, you don't have to charge, $8 million for it.
That's a great point because engineering wise, you spend, some amount of money designing the thing, and then you start selling it. And each time you sell it, you can bring the cost down because you have to spend less time at the beginning before you sell that unit designing it, right? And so the better you get at making it, the easier, cheaper it gets.
That's just why I think it's very talking about not being exclusive language, not counting on one thing. I don't like depending on government regulation. I don't like depending on government to step in and say this is how things need to be done. You have to do this. You have to do this. I think they can provide incentives for innovation and provide like investments in innovation, like that. That's government a great role for government to have. Finding the best solutions, pumping money into them, and private money will follow it. Creating some sort of carbon tracking system with tax or
yeah. So let me know how I feel about this, Drake. What would you say if every product you bought, like if you were buying food, it has a nutritional sticker on it? Every product you bought had a carbon sticker on it. How cool would that be?
informed consumer
Yeah.
decision, and who that's the argument for informed capitalism. I believe informed capitalism is the best system, but the problem is when companies try to intentionally avoid informing a consumer about the decisions they're making. Informed capitalism is the way to fix this. Is a really great way to fix this, because then you're gonna start getting that price tag down from 8 million to 6 million to 4 million to 2 million, and you're gonna start having that competition, and you're gonna have people racing to be the people who can sell that $2 million equipment, make it better, do what it does at a cheaper cost. When people start realizing, oh wait, there's money here, and that's that thing that this book comes back to. This isn't charity. This is a capitalistic opportunity for people to create energy. Energy is this huge market that if people are just willing to, they need to get out of their previous investments.
It's not willing. It's aware. That's the thing. Like that's the thing. They're becoming aware. The largest private investment firm in the world, BlackRock, recently decided. Look at that. Recently decided to prioritize ESG investing, which is environmental, social, and governmentally like equitable like investing. And that's a central pillar of their portfolio now.
I've actually heard that said before. Like ESG is one of the best ways to save our everything.
Yeah.
Making investment choices based on not only money, but also how it can affect the environment. But also money. Expecting altruism to save us is not going to do anything. Go ahead.
My final note on that is I support that entirely because that's how the company I work for gets paid. So definitely promote ESG investing in general. Is that in focus? You see that picture? This picture there? So that picture is Shanghai in 1987 and 2013. 1987 is the not intense skyline. How's that? 1987 is this one, and this is 2013. That's 20 years, less than 20 years. So the reason I want to show that picture is think about not just the human systems that people build on top of buildings and infrastructure and all this stuff, but literally just the sheer volume of material it took to make that transition. Like how much air in that picture, in that first picture, is no longer air. It has been displaced by a material someone manufactured, right? When I look at that picture, dude, you're talking about making money through this stuff. All I see is money, right? Because like, there's so much money to be made in making this stuff in a fair way. We are going to build cities at the rate of a New York City every month. A whole New York City every month. Not of course individual cities, but additions to already existing cities over the course of time. Which is a very big problem, which requires a very big solution. Which is exciting, right?
Let's kind of heading towards the wrap. I am really excited. This book, more than anything, got me excited. As someone who is aware of the climate emergency, as someone who wants to do something, and especially as someone who is investment, is focused on investments. I won't call myself an investor because I don't have the capital, but I do look at investments, and this book got me excited that investing is a strong contender for something that can save and make huge change. And the couple of ways that he talked about making change are, spend your money where you spend those extra 8-10 cents to buy electricity that's green. That's the way to make changes. Yet you cannot rely on big government to come in and fix everything. It's not going to work. You as a consumer have a responsibility. I'll do that again. You as a consumer have a responsibility to pay what you can to make the difference. If you think this is a big deal, and if you don't think it's a big deal, go read the first chapter, go read the second chapter, go read the third chapter. If you know that it is a big deal, put your money there. People are going to chase it. People are going to chase it.
The best way to talk about what we need to do from this book is like, I'm just going to read 4 or 5 sentences from his the last chapter, what each of us can do. As a citizen, make calls, write letters, attend town halls about these issues, right? Look locally as well as nationally. Really fucking, excuse the language. Very important point. The national government is not, just because it occupies the most news time, it's not all that exists. Or run for office if you want to, and set the stuff up. As a consumer, sign up for a green pricing program with your electric utility. I think thinking about the green pricing, that green premium is important in any way you spend money. If you because I have a pleasantly disposable amount of income, right? And so I think it's my responsibility as someone invested in the future of the planet Earth to, when I have the option and I'm in the store or anywhere considering doing something, to choose the option that produces less greenhouse gases.
Along with that, for example, I'm looking at getting a new car. I'm considering buying a new car soon. And now I'm going to put it off because I've decided to wait, save up a little more money, and make the leap and buy a more expensive electric vehicle. Because
my next car is going to be an electric vehicle for sure, no doubt about it.
I just decided it matters. It matters to me enough that I'm going to take the hit. I'm going to force myself to hold off on that instant gratification. I'm gonna save up my money, and I'm gonna tell manufacturers, I'm gonna tell car manufacturers with my dollars, I care about this issue. I'm willing to pay more to help the environment.
Absolutely. Funnily enough, the next one was buy an electric vehicle. Next one was that is try a plant-based burger. Meat is horrible for the climate, very bad. And something I've figured out recently is that I don't have to eat meat every meal. I probably eat meat I still probably eat meat 3 out of 5 meals. But those other 2 out of 5, they're not less filling, not less, and it actually makes me appreciate meat more when I do get it. I'm like, this is delicious. I don't eat this as often. As an employee or an employer, set up an internal carbon tax. So on your operations, think about that. Prioritize innovation and low carbon solutions. Be an early adopter. Engage in the policymaking process. Connect with government funded research. Help early stage innovators get across the valley of death. That's an important one. From my experience, Drake, working in the industry I do, someone has a good idea and they want it to get funded and build a thing. One out of depending on what funding stage you start paying attention to the idea, right? So if you start paying attention to the idea pretty late in the process, right? So there's already been a significant portion of money invested in this thing. It's already been pretty seriously vetted. 1 in 8 will get built. Yeah, of the ones that have gotten pretty significant investing already and been vetted, 1 in 8 will make it to completion, which is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Also for those people that are trying to make things happen, but that's the hurdle that you're trying to overcome when you're trying to get people to put money into green energy. You're overcoming. You have to convince someone to jump 8 times, even though they know that 7 of the times they're going to get hit in the face.
Well, that 8th time they make 40% return on top of their money within 2 years. That's so. No, that was it. It's something I want to say we should do. Let's read this book. It's that simple.
We're coming here to the end, but we did not cover nearly as much detail as Bill Gates was able to cover in this book, and we did not cover it nearly as well. He does an incredible job at setting it out for people like Squid, people like me. I think Squid has a much deeper knowledge of this than I do, but we were still both able to get a lot out of this book. It was really good to read a book that matters. It's relevant right now. It's new, and it felt good to start feeling a little bit more informed.
Absolutely.
Let's go back into our final thoughts. We're gonna start with you, Squid. You ready?
Yeah. Final thoughts of this book?
Yeah. Final thoughts. Give us a little wrap. Then I'll bring it back to me, and we'll end on that. We'll end on a win to everyone.
Read it, man. It's just really relevant knowledge about
3, 2, 1.
Oh well. Read it. It's just very relevant knowledge. I think that every person needs to know. I think this is neutral default level required knowledge of climate change. Right? It's not emotionally written. It doesn't appeal. It's not an emotional appeal. It's not politically motivated. It's not left leaning or right leaning. It's factual and informative and has the appropriate outlook on these issues that I think we need to pick up and use going forward.
I responded well to this book because it had a really good sense of urgency. An urgency that I feel like we haven't really seen out of the climate activism, and he also had a pragmatism that I don't see out of common climate activism. He did a really good job of creating a call to action for any person, from person who's living paycheck to paycheck, to people who have the disposable income to make a difference, to big government, to individuals, to corporations. He covered what each person's responsible for and what they can do to make a difference. And that full-fledged approach to this issue is both necessary and really refreshing to see. So I was really happy to read this book because it felt like it was talking to each and every person in a way that they could understand, but also not feel talked down to. And so I really recommend picking this book up and reading it. It just came out. It's relevant. It's fresh. It's new. Grab this book if you want to know what's happening with climate change, and I really do think you should. And with that, we're going to call it a wrap. So please and thank you for everyone who came and joined us in the chat. This has been your weekly podcast, Read Between the Lines, where we cover a nonfiction and a fiction book every other week. So join us next time to go behind the book and between the lines of some of your favorite books.